Welcome to Master the World, and we're going to start the tasting with Madeline.
Hello, everyone. Wine number one. And these, by the way, are questions to consider, especially if you are not used to doing this and your mind wants something to hang on to. So the first question, if you'd like to chew on that as we taste together, has to do with the aroma. And you could have floral, tropical, and or citrus. The second question has to do with that wonderful sommelier phrase that I always have to define for consumers. Inorganic minerality as opposed to organic earthiness, the rocky business. And the third question has to do with the wine's texture, which I think is so important, both for deduction and also in terms of describing it to consumers or if you're working with staff. So that's it. The appearance, and don't phone that in because it's part of the whole, and it's quite important often when it comes to deduction. So this wine is brilliant in my light. It's just very shiny, and it is to me a pale yellow or a straw, but in my light it's really a pale yellow with some subtle green glints, which is giving me an indication of something that's on the young side. And just the way it moves in the glass, it seems to have moderate extract. I'm not going to overthink it beyond that. It's not clinging to the sides. So I'm not going to analyze the legs beyond saying that they're moderate and running in that fashion as well. And aromatically, it is incredibly fresh and generous right out of the gate. It is citrus with a smile and an exclamation mark. I would say ripe citrus, ripe lemon, verging on Meyer lemon, but not really sweet, and tart tree fruit, crunchy green pears, like I just am chopping up a Granny Smith, and maybe some unripe pineapples. So this combination of sweet and tart fragrance, and certainly a florality to it. It's like you crush some citrus blossoms, an unkind thing to do to flowers, but lemon or lime blossoms. And there's a little bit of a green element in here, like fresh snipped herbs of some sort. Maybe it's green olive. I'll know that when I taste it. And it smells, I can smell that rocky minerality right now. I don't think I'm imagining it because I said it. It smells a little bit like sea spray. It smells incredibly inviting, fresh, forward, and attractive. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate. Thank God most of us are in the trade, and those of you who aren't are a little ill-mannered. Sounds are simply because we're greedy and we like to amplify our sense of smell and our sense of taste. So the attack, if you will, as it hits the palate is actually wonderfully tart. It is a specific kind of acidity that's certainly bracing and, medium plus to high, but the feel of it is not what I would call excessive. It is not too tart to taste through the wine, but I am actually going to go back and take another taste immediately, so that my palate adjusts to the acidity and I can be a little bit more contemplative about it. There's that salty minerality again. Mid-palate, and this is a personal trick I like to do. I hold the wine in my mouth, especially after the first taste, and I get a mid-palate plumb line of flavor. And there's that ripe citrus, almost an illusion of sweetness mid-palate. But the minute you spit it out or swallow it, the length, sears on, both with acidity and flavor and salinity. There's the citrus again. Everything I smelled on the nose is on the palate. The tart, tree fruits, green apple, maybe a little bit of Bosc pear, unripe pineapple, just ripe honeydew. And it does actually taste like you're chewing on flowers as well. There's a little bit of green olive flavor to it, as well as fresh herbs. If I had to pick one, I would probably say sorrel, because that mirrors the citrus component. We've talked about inorganic earth. I don't pick up any organic earth. No oak aging, with the brass band. If they told me there was even neutral oak on this, I'd go, I don't think so. Show me the barrel. It is long. There's a little bit of nuttiness to it that in our world signifies, a little bit of oxidation in a positive way, and or lees contact, which I think this has had. So this is a very fresh white wine that is young. It is driven by strong minerality and flavors and fragrances of citrus and tart fruit, as well as green vegetables and an herbal component. And it has distinctive florality, which doesn't drive the wine, but you don't have to fight for it. And it is long and refreshing. It's gently cleansing, as tart as it is. So, grape varieties to consider. Albarino, aka Albarino, if we were in Portugal, the coolest, I think, accent on the planet. A blend, possibly. So it could be blended with other grape varieties in the regions where it is grown. If you look down at the option, Portugal is obvious. We have Sauvignon Blanc or Sauvignon Blanc blend, which is generally with what? Semillon or Muscadel. Our options are France. Certainly Australia and California as well, and Viognier, which could be France or Australia or California. So what do we have? We have Albarino and Viognier that to me are, Albarino is really semi-aromatic, sometimes verging on highly aromatic, depending on how fresh and who makes it and how old the vines are. Viognier is quite aromatic, but it tends to be well-mannered unless we confuse it with oak. And Sauvignon Blanc is, by anybody's definition, highly aromatic. And if it's not, all of us are disappointed. By the way, this is, what do we call this? Anonymous. Yes. So your name is not going to be next to your vote if you're feeling shy about it. And it's very helpful, not just to you, but to all of us, all of your co-tasters, to vote with abandon and vote for other. If none of these three options speak to you, and write it in the chat room.
And I think that what's important for those of you who don't have the wines, and we do encourage people to come just to learn, even if you don't have the wines, you'll notice that Madeline was going through, I was showing the color on a white background so that you can guess along and come on to the poll and just guess along. And that actually, if you just listen to the descriptors, and if you can try to stylistically find where that then is and where that benchmark is, that's a really great way to learn as well. So, Maddie, any words of hinting?
The hinting, I will say the the three things I mentioned a lot, if we look at these three options, or actually, hell, let's just go down to the bottom and consider old world, new world. I mentioned minerality a lot. It doesn't mean the new world, it doesn't eliminate the new world altogether, but boy, the loud hint I'm getting is old world. And in terms of the specific grape varieties, I would, and I don't mind being forthright about this on wine number one. I'm not getting Sauvignon Blanc tags. I don't get either a grassiness or a grapefruitiness. You might have. So if you voted for it, this doesn't make you wrong. I'm just pretending I'm tasting this blind. But I certainly think both the florality could apply to both Albarino and to Viognier. So I would be nudged in that direction. However, P.S., before we flip, Viognier has a very specific mouthfeel, and you might want to channel that from the ones you've tasted. It tends to be round, soft, and on occasion acid deficient, depending on where it's grown.
I'm going to challenge the 40% who did not answer this time.
40%.
I know.
I'm not intimidating. Wait till you listen to my code.
Please answer next time. It is anonymous. We don't know what you think, right?
Yeah.
But it is good to put a stake in the ground. So, Maddie, we have 39% on Albarino.
We have a lot for Sauvignon Blanc. My bad for eliminating it theoretically, but you're telling me it's aromatic enough, and you're getting Sauvignon Blanc tags clearly for that many of you to have voted for it. So thank you for writing my vote. And, a respectable vote for Viognier. Is anybody typing in what the other that they think is?
I'm not seeing it. So if you wrote other, let us know what you're thinking
Yeah,
other
that would be
was so that we
useful.
can help.
Mhm.
And
I
then
saw one Aligote vote, one Melon de Bourgogne vote.
Ooh. So,
Yeah.
both acidity and minerality, right? In both those cases from probably France, right? And I think we are drum roll ready for the reveal. Li Meng, I'm doing my best to keep us at a steady clip because I
I love
usually
it. I
drag
love
my
it. And
feet.
88% were actually on Old World. So let's see
Mhm.
where we're going.
And we have someone who guessed Verdicchio, just had a couple, so thank you for throwing that in the mix. It tends to have distinctive minerality and also, eastern coast of southern Italy. And we are taking a slow flight to where we're going. And in the meantime, I will talk about it. This is indeed Albarino, but in this case, we're going to call it Alvarinho. And my dear friend Evan has coached me on how to pronounce some of these beautiful Portuguese words that are involved. We are in northern Portugal, and we are in an area called Vinho Verde. I have been corrected more than once, so now I don't say Vinho Verde, it is Vinho Verde, which is, really synonymous with the Minho or the Minho Valley. You can look up the differences legally, but the geographic area is the same. And the Minho Valley is named after the river. We are at a quinta, which is just east and inland of Oporto. And the quinta and the township where it lives is called Da Lixa. How did I do, Evan? And it is a relatively modern winery. They are not claiming for the provenance of this blend, actually, because it's Alvarinho with Loureiro and Trajadura. I just love Portuguese, which are grape varieties that are allowable in this whole area. Alvarinho usually dominates the northern areas that are famous for the grape variety, Monção and Melgaço. And this is Alvarinho's listed first. It does dominate the blend, but I couldn't tell you by percentage with the others following. And they're simply claiming Vinho Verde, not one of the 9 subdistricts. And what are we talking about? We're talking about a grape variety that is absolutely known for its distinctive, aromatic, and usually very high quality wine if, viticulture is giving it its respect. It does very well in damp climates, which this area of the world can very well be because it's got thick skins, and its wines do not lack in acidity, flavor, and structure. And we're in the northwestern part of the country. As we discussed, we've got the cool, rainy Atlantic as a big time influence. And this is the area that was known for pergolas, bringing the vines up, though only 10% are doing that anymore, as I understand it. And Vinho Verde does not mean, it means green wine, but it doesn't mean everything's white here. It just got that moniker from youthful freshness, and it applied to red wine as well. And frankly, I would say 20, 25 years ago, it was at best a little bit, it was spritzy, it was inexpensive, and the quality was, moderate at best. And the quality has really gone on a vertical climb for not just Alvarinho, but Vinho Verde. What else
Great.
to tell you?
Maddie,
I think I
we have
did a
some
reasonable
questions.
job.
You did great. You did fabulous. I want to just throw in a couple of questions here. I'm going to start with a comment from Bill that I absolutely love. I can see that you Psalms are bent on determined to teach me what Albarino tastes like. I guess, Evan, we've had a few Albarino. But I love this comment, Tim. He says that he remembered Tim talking about the phenolic bitterness. For those in the crowd who are not quite understanding phenolic bitterness, can you explain what that is, what Bill is seeing in this wine?
Yeah, I'll try to do a short answer. So Bill, way to go. So phenolic bitterness, everyone, grape skins, no matter what color they are, have over 300 compounds called phenols. Tannin is actually a phenol. And if you have skin contact with the juice, the must in it for any length of time, you're going to get some of those phenols in the juice, and on the palate, they taste bitter. and they actually give the wine structure just like tannin gives red wine structure. So for semi-aromatic grapes like Alvarinho, you get it, and William, good point. And for a fully aromatic grape like Gewürztraminer or Muscat or Torrontés, you get a lot of it. So
Thank you for
Great.
bringing
Good
that
call.
up, because this does have it. You know,
Yeah.
not a brass band, but it does have it. One parting shot before I give, you know, the baton to Evan. Some of you who are going for accreditations, this is the winemaker who's actually became a very big deal, and he is the winemaker in residence, not part of the family. And his name is Carlos Teixeira. It's just fun to say also, but this is a family owned and operated winery. If you're asking your question, gee, is Vino Verde now testable in the MS universe? You know, well, Albarino certainly is by anybody's measure. And I love Evan's answer to that question, usually has to do with, you know, the MTW kits are a combination of testable varieties and some that frankly, as wine professionals and alert consumers, we should know about and should be able to assess qualitatively.
Great. We have 2 more questions, so I want to go ahead these really quickly.
Okay.
Kevin says, I'm not getting the typical effervescence sparkle in this one that's typical to many Vino Verdes. Do you agree that there is effervescence that you should be getting in Vino Verde, and is that typical?
I
This
can
certainly
take
doesn't have it.
this
Go
one.
ahead, Ev.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't speak for every single bottle. Mine prickles my tongue. I'm getting a light prickle. I think in the old days, they were borderline carbonated because they do add CO2, particularly into the cheap, cheerful stuff that also has residual sugar in it. But this one actually is bottled with a little bit of CO2 just spritzed at the end to keep it fresh, to keep it vibrant. And at least in the bottle I had, it prickled, didn't scrub my tongue, but it prickled my tongue. And that is still a very common practice in the Mino throughout all wines to, amplify freshness.
Great. Evan, this last question is for you, because I know that this is a question you get a lot. What is the difference between Portuguese Alvarinho and Spanish Albarino?
Well, I mean, essentially, but long before there was Spain and Portugal, there was this big place called Iberia, and they basically sit on the other sides of a river from one another. So in the southern part, you're technically in Portugal. In the northern part, you're actually in Spain, because Spain, envelops Portugal from 3 sides. In the areas of Spain where it is, the exposure is such that the wines generally tend to be richer, a little bit rounder. The fruit tends to be more stone, less citrus, more nectarine, more peach, things like that. And the texture tends to be a little bit more just smoother. Those that come from Portugal, as you have here, tend to be a little bit more linear, a bit more citric, as Madeline pointed out, with green elements to them and herbs. You do pick up a little bit more on the salinity there, because you're actually closer to the ocean there than you are in most parts of where the Rias Baixas is. And the wines just tend to be a bit more austere. That would be there. But they obviously share tremendous commonality. It is literally DNA, the same grape. The other thing is, if it does say Alvarinho on the label in Portugal, by law, it has to be 100%. So typically your average Alvarinho rather, would be even more linear than this. This wine is actually rounded out by the addition of Loureiro and the Trechadura that Madeline pointed out, which add both textural elements as well as some of the more, Trechadura particularly gives you some tropical elements. Madeline talked about pineapple before. That's a spot-on descriptor for Trechadura.
Right. And Tim, just before we go to Evan, this last thing, I just need to ask the question of you. Is Albarino testable on a level 2 certified Somm? What is our answer?
I tried, Tim.
I don't know. How's that? It certainly is in the testable universe. Whether it finds its way into the certified exam, I couldn't tell you, because the wines change every year. So,
Great.
Yeah. But I just want to echo something that Madeline said, and that Evan has said many times. The intent of these kits is to teach you how to judge quality. And the kits are a mix of wines that are certainly testable in different wine certification paths, and then otherwise. But again, at the end of the day, that's what we're all supposed to learn how to do, is we get hired in a job to be able to judge quality. So keep that in mind.
Great. Awesome. Evan, you are up.
Well stated, Tim. A good way to move into to the second wine. Again, 3 questions on your left-hand side there, just for you to consider. Ask yourself, as you're going through these. You know, what are some of the answers there? And again, there's not right or wrong answers. They're just to be thought-provoking. So, looking at this wine right off the bat, the color is richer and deeper than Madeline's wine, which suggests to me either 1 could be a different grape variety, 2 it could be older because of the richer color, or 3 it could come from a warmer climate. Simply because of the nature of it, or could have spent more time in oak. Oak also darkens wines. I don't know anything more than that by just looking at it, but I do note that the color is deeper, it's richer, it's more sort of like a medium yellow, maybe medium, the fuller element of yellow. For some people, it might be pushing gold. Gold to me actually has more of a brownish tinge to it, which this doesn't have. This one is definitely in that yellow vein. But all the elements that we want to talk about here are in the nose. And as I always say before, look for a few things: fruit terms, earth terms, and wood terms, and you'll be in the right place and impress your friends with all of your knowledge. So right off the bat, what's interesting to me about this wine is there is fruit here, and I'm going to come to it in a minute, but there's definitely, once again, sort of an earthiness to it. There's sort of a grittiness, a brightness, a shrillness, if you will, to a sort of mineral terroirish sort of thing. A bit amorphous at that point in time, but I actually picked that up right away. As far as the fruit character, so that's my earth thing, right? As far as the fruit character goes, I am getting notes of citrus, but more, Madeline's was more tart. Mine is more ripe. So I'm more in the mandarin, tangerine, Meyer lemon as opposed to a Eureka lemon vein of things. And they're very, very ripe. I get a lot of tree fruit here. Again, sort of riper notes of quince, riper notes of apples and pears, some stone fruit as well too, perhaps some sort of softer peach tones, and then this sort of like little soft but nevertheless notable flurry of tropical elements in the back, from mango to pineapple, probably more on the just ripe to unripe side, and maybe even a hint of melon, which I don't know where you put melon. Doesn't really fit any category. I throw it in tropical, but it's really its own sort of fruit thing. Then I get florality, and the florality is strong. Florals to me goes into the fruit thing. Anything that grows out of the ground goes in the fruit thing. And here it comes off as sort of an orange blossom nature, sort of that sweet citric element, honeysuckle, a little bit fragrant in that regard. And then I pick up notes of like chamomile, a little bit of almost sort of a saffronish thing. And then a sort of undercurrent of sesame or sesame seeds, which suggests to me probably either soft oxidation or, as Madeline talked about before, lees contact, which would definitely give you that too. It smells a little bit like, for those of you who are fans of it, halava candy. Halava, I love halava. So I use halava as a descriptor, although most people have no idea what I am talking about. Structurally, the wine is rounder, a bit creamier than the wine that Madeline had. The flavors are still very omnipresent, pretty much echoing everything I talked about before: the riper citrus, the rounder tree fruit, those elements of stone fruit, and again, the sort of underlining tropicality. The floral notes really pop up there. No, I wouldn't call this honeyed at all. It definitely has a strong honeysuckle element, or sort of maybe freesia that's not quite there yet. Everything else is in place. The acid is appropriate. It's not what I would call super shrill, but nevertheless, it's there. It's carrying that. Remember, to carry body, to carry weight, which this wine has, you need acid, or the wine comes off as being sort of flabby. The wine here is persistent. It's not rapier or electrifying in acidity, but it carries through, and the finish is moderate plus. So very interesting grape, or grapes, if you will. It could be a blend. Your choices here are Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio being sort of a non-aromatic grape that we find in Italia, but also in California, also in Australia, in France, called Pinot Gris. We have Fiano, which is a grape as well. Most of the specifically associated with Italy, but also you find it in California. I've had some great Fianos out of Lodi recently. Vermentino, another Italian grape. You're starting to see a theme here of grapes that, again, you would find in California, Italy, but also I've seen a bit in Australia. And Vermentino in France, by the way, can no longer be called Vermentino by law. It has to be called by the name that they use in Corsica, part of France, which is Rolle. Rolle. So this is the last year that you're going to see Vermentino listed on French wine labels, because they fought the law and the law won, and the Italians went out. Everybody who's not French, who's not Italian, can't call the things Vermentino, and you have your various countries along the way to think about.
Awesome. Well, listen, guys, we're aiming for better than 60% participation this time. So I'm going to hold you guys to it. Anonymous poll. Try to go for it.
Yeah.
Evan, obviously there's a lot of Italian names here, but you're saying that they're grown everywhere.
Yeah.
Great.
Very much so. Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio, of course, is planted everywhere on this planet, and more Pinot Grigio is sold than just about any variety if you look broadly across Italy, add in other places and things like that. Vermentino, you're starting to see more and more of as well, too. I saw a lot of it when I was down in Australia, but you see it in California these days. It's actually starting to take a nice little footstep forward, and there are some really good examples. And Fiano, like I said, not that many places yet, but I think it's a really exciting variety. Probably the most semi-aromatic of the three of them. If you're picking up lots of aromatic notes, that can be a knee-jerker for there. Yeah.
And I'm just going to push those who said other. I think this is actually one, especially if you've never seen, besides Pinot Grigio, this is probably one that you did have something other in mind. So it would be helpful to see what other you had thought of. And Evan, this is an interesting comment. This bubble gum cotton candy is kind of that honeysuckle that was honeysuckle you.
And there are elements of confected sort of fruit here, more hard candy, and not so much like jam or things that you actually cook. But I could see that. And again, that sort of gives you into that sort of Lifesaver vein or that Jolly Rancher-ish vein, although not as tart as a Jolly Rancher, but sort of saying bubblegummy, confected, particularly with the tropical elements of fruit. That's very classic.
Great. Well, we were at 71%, so everyone's doing better already.
Great,
60
great.
to 70.
And I think between the Fiano and the Vermentino, people are picking up on the fact that Pinot Grigio is relatively neutral by definition. Probably it's most expressive in the New World areas, but these other grapes definitely can show more. And the other, if anyone wants to talk about later, they can. Obviously, most of those grapes are associated with Italy, so I'm not surprised to see Italy winning with 2/3 of the vote.
So, Evan, why would it not be New World, in your opinion?
Well, it could be New World. I think the only thing that would probably, the nature of the ripeness of the fruit, particularly, and the forwardness of the fruit could suggest to you New World. But what I'm picking up here, as I pointed out very much at the get-go, is there is a distinctive underlying minerality here today. And it definitely is not only picked up in terms of aroma, but actually in terms of texture. There is a grittiness to this wine that I physically get here, and that to me suggests minerality. Minerality to me is as much felt as it is smelt. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's leave Portugal. Ciao, my friends at Quinta da Lixa. Ciao, Minho. Ciao, all those areas, and we're going to go up on a plane, and we're going to stay in the old world. For sure, but they don't really have a lot of this particular grape in Portugal. So we're going to have to leave Portugal, and we're going to dance our way, as you probably would have suspected, over to Italy. Most of you were in Italy. A lot of you were in Italy, and you're right in that one. However, this grape, I think we would probably all agree collectively, is a little bit too expressive to be Pinot Grigio. So it probably could be one of those other grapes. And in this particular case, we're going to head south in Italy. We're going to go down to the area of Campania, down on the south coast, on the Mediterranean side of things, not the Adriatic, and end up in a very cool spot, a province specifically of Campania called Avellino. And that's where we are going to find this particular wine, which is a Fiano, the name of the grape, de Avellino, which is the name of the place. So I think right off the bat, as I want to bring that up, because oftentimes people talk about, I've literally had people say the Fiano di Avellino grape. And the Fiano di Avellino grape is probably the best example of it from Avellino, but Fiano is actually the name of the grape. And like I said before, you will see wines labeled Fiano grown in other places, just not in the mountainous Apennine area around Campania. It's probably at its most expressive in this part of the world, and probably considered to be at its peak, its pinnacle here, not just in terms of height. Obviously, it's located in Campania on volcanic soils. So remember, I talked to you a little bit about the grittiness of the wine before. And if those of you have had wines that come from volcanic soils, you know that they tend to have a bit of a grip and a grit in the mouth. They tend to have a brightness of acidity, which this wine does, but then that acidity is somewhat stepping back because the wine itself is so rich. And Fiano is a very rich, round, particularly creamy wine. It tends to bridge on the exotic. So remember, we talked a little bit before about the orange blossom and the honeysuckle elements, the tropicality of fruit. That's very typical of Fiano, which along with the Greco grape of Greco di Tufo represent the two indigenous grapes of this area that go back thousands of years to the Greco-Roman times, if you will. And we're literally about to go extinct when our dear friend Carlo Mastro Berarino pretty much archived them and had everybody get excited about planting them again. The thing that's interesting about this particular estate, Tenuta Scotto, is a couple things. Number one, their winemaker, who we'll see in a minute, a gentleman by the name of Angelo Valentino, no relation to Rudolph Valentino, I might add, does a really good job. He is a prince of this particular grape variety. I think shows it at its wonderful expression. And do note, when you go out and shop for this, particularly from this producer who's considered a strong producer for this variety, they make two versions of it. There's this one, which looks like the one with the funny, can you go back to the picture of the label for a second, Li Meng? You'll see this label here, and that you'll see that little iconography that looks like something, I don't know, out of a manga thing or whatever, or maybe out of something else like that. That would be good. But he makes another one called Oini, O-I-N-I, which is oak aged. And I specifically didn't pick that one for two reasons. Number one, it didn't show the variety as strongly as this one did. And number two, you know, we're all about showing you classic examples of the variety. It reminds me of the days when everybody in the Rhone Valley was putting everything in oak barrels and it tasted like oak barrels. So purity is important with this wine. There you go.
Yeah. Evan, so between the first wine and the second wine, obviously there's this sense of sharpness and acidity versus this roundness. Is that roundness from the grape variety?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's probably a combination of time on lees, because that will add a creaminess and a texture there, and we'll give you that autolytic character. And oftentimes that's done with Fiano. And one of the terms that I didn't pick up today, but it's considered a very typical Fiano flavor, is the flavor of hazelnut. And that does speak a lot to that. I called it halava today. It was more like sesame seeds today, less like hazelnut. So between that, which adds the lees, gives you that richer color, which you saw as well too. Fiano is a slightly more pigmented grape as well, but you're going to pick that up. And the roundness there, you know, in many respects, it reminds you more of the Viognier option that Madeline talked about before, without being quite as exuberant.
I have to say, I don't remember the last Fiano I had. This was really good.
Yeah, no, this one's a really, if you guys want to put this one in the brain and hit save, this is a really tremendous example of what Fiano should taste like.
I'm typing up because there are a couple of options out there from really established importers. And, you know, the one that I've been having recently is Benito Ferreira. And it's like this one, you have a richness to it, a roundness to it. It manages to be refreshing, but it is, you know, in a cheerful way, more serious. And I just think that the potential of these, especially if you're giving people alternative or yourself alternatives to barrel fermented Chardonnay, because you want some weight and you want some complexity.
And this, yeah, and the last thing I would say before we go, and no, Scott, I don't know what the RS is here. I think it's a lot of ripe fruit. I suspect the RS, while there may be tactile for some people, is very, very, very low. But I would say, to one, echo Madeline's point, great way to train people off Chardonnay to look for other things, the way white Rhones do and Viognier can be, to an effect. But the other thing is, remember here that in Campania is pretty warm. You're up in the mountains here. So this is actually the coolest appellation, Avellino is, of all of Campania.
Yeah, and I just want to shout out to Kevin and his comment. After 2 wines, my conclusion is I don't drink enough wine. I work at this winery every single day, and I haven't had one in a very long time that I can remember. So absolutely. And I hope that what Evan is doing here with his team is changing minds and opening minds up. On that note, Evan, one last question. Is Viognier as a call for this wine versus it actually being Fiano? How will you distinguish Viognier? Yeah,
Viognier tends to be much more dancing on the table with a lampshade on your head kind of wine, as opposed to this wine tends to be loud, probably like me, but maybe not quite as showy, dancing on the table. I don't dance on tables unless provoked.
All right, very good. All right, Tim, you're up. We're on wine number 3.
Okay, just a closing remark about Fiano. So way back in 1998, when there were pterodactyls in the first round of .com, I was working with fellow MS and good friend of both of everybody here, Peter Granoff, and a local importer in the Bay Area, Evan, you would know him, Rand Yazzolino, brought me a Fiano Diavolino from Clelia Romano. And I imported all 100 and some odd cases that year that he brought in. And we used that wine. So that was Virtual Vineyards, everyone, which became wine.com.
Wine.com.
And we imported that wine for 4 or 5 years running and had great success. So Clelia Romano's Fiano is one you should look for. Okay, now for something completely different. Everybody, wine number 3, the first red wine. And look at my questions. What does the color, the depth of color tell you about the possible grape varieties? Okay, look at your wine against a white background like Li Meng showing you. And then how would you describe the earth and mineral qualities, but also what about the non-fruit qualities? And they're kind of important here. And then finally, how is the wine's climate of origin reflected in the structure? And can you put the depth of color and connect it to the structure? That's a very curious question. All right, with that, let's get started. In terms of the site, as we hold it and take a look at it, it's a true ruby, a medium plus ruby, not quite deep. Notice it's very youthful because the rim is a fuchsia or dark pink purple. What else about it? It doesn't quite stain the glass. Okay. And then on the nose, in terms of the fruit, it's a combination of red and darker fruit, but predominantly red. So you have things like sour, red cherry, red plum, maybe a little strawberry. And everything is tart and ripe together, but fresh. So there's really no age in the wine, which connects to the color, by the way. The black fruit, everything about it is lifted. So it's black fruit that is not ripe. It's definitely not jammy, but is lifted. So it has aphids like blackberry and black raspberry. And again, it is fresh, tart, and ripe. There's a touch of orange peel in it, which I think is fair to say. And now we're getting to the non-fruit, and here there's quite a few things going on. First of all, there's some really pretty fresh rose above the glass for floral. There's some tea leaf like bergamot, also some savory herb, something along the line of the laurel, maybe even a little fennel. And then there's both earth and mineral there. So the earth is like potting soil, the mineral is like clay, not quite chalk, but there's definitely some mineral type texture. There's mushroom, there's anise, and I don't, this is, I tend to lump it in fruit, but there's a little rhubarb, which is a vegetal red tart quality. Then there's also some oak aging here, and it's mixed. It's mostly used, but there's some smoked toast spice. And there's a really fresh fruit quality to the wine as well that speaks of the age. Okay, then on the palate. All right, the wine is youthful. It is tart. Everything about the wine turns tart. Even any ripeness in the fruit now becomes more dominantly red fruit, but everything was there. All the sour cherry, raspberry, the rhubarb, cranberry, it's all tart, fresh. The blackberry is in the background and really just a second fiddle to what's going on. Herbs come up, there's more tea leaf, there's more laurel, there's star anise and fennel. The earthiness is more there than mineral. And then the toastiness, smokiness from the oak is in the back. And then in terms of the structure, the wine makes you salivate. So the acid is medium plus. If you say, oh, and inhale and check for the alcohol after you spit it out or swallow it, for those of you not driving later, the alcohol is a solid medium. The tannin is medium. And the finish is a little lean, a little tart, a little astringent. And the finish is medium plus, and complexity medium plus and beyond. Okay, here we are. Here are your votes, your possibilities, ladies and gentlemen. So we have Gamay, Pinot Noir, Grenache Blend. Your possible countries in the old world are Italy and France. And then in the new world, Oregon and New Zealand. Okay, all right. So do we want more information at this point, Li Ming, or later?
I think that you can give a little bit more information.
Okay. All right, everybody,
little hint.
as you look at these grape varieties, process of elimination and trying to figure out what is this at the end of my fork, as Mr. Burroughs once said. We're going to do process of elimination. So Gamay in its classic forms is something like Beaujolais village, which would have carbonic maceration and stem inclusion. So ask yourself, is there a tutti frutti Jolly Rancher quality to the fruit? Is there stem tannin? Okay. And then Pinot Noir is classically red fruit. And if it is from the old world, obviously best case scenario is Burgundy, in which case it is earthy. And there are a lot of non-fruit type things. And then we go to Grenache, and there the structure changes. All of a sudden the fruit becomes riper, there's more alcohol, there's more savory qualities, more tannin, and just more stuff. So, Grenache blends, it's like the old world version of frat parties. It's not Zinfandel, but if you give Grenache the chance, it will get out of control. Okay? With that,
I'm going to give everyone just another 30 seconds. And Tim, in the meantime, what do you think about how it's not Cab Franc or Mencia?
that's how is it not Elvis or Beyonce?
Right?
Well, in terms of the Cabernet Franc, and those of you in the second white wine that went for Sauvignon Blanc, look, you've got to be convinced there's got to be pyrazines. There's got to be something that smells like bell pepper and grass and green herbs. And so that is Cabernet Franc because it's in the Cabernet Sauvignon family. With Mencia, I would think more color, more fruit concentration, more everything, more tannin, more earth. I mean, it's just usually, and there are exceptions depending on where it's grown, it's a pretty intense wine compared to this.
All right. Well, let's see where it's from.
Okay. All right. So we're leaving the hills of Campania. Unfortunately, this is not a very long flight, although I have a feeling the connections might set you back.
The connections might be a little problematic, yeah.
But then you could always go have a Campari at the airport. They have it in pre-mixed little bottles, which is just one of the best inventions ever. Okay. All right. And we're probably going to fly into Lyon, I'm thinking, because it's a pretty sizable regional airport. And then your driver is going to pick you up. And then in about an hour and 20 minutes, you're going to be in the Côte d'Or. And life just doesn't get any better. And wines don't get a lot of it more expensive in some places. So we were at Domaine Michel Magnan in Thiers in Côte de Nuit. And well, what can we say about this? This is a home run estate, father and son. So this is Frédéric, father, and Michel's son. And they had been working together. They sold their grapes until 1993, at which point they said, we could probably make more money if we made our own wine. Because by that point, the family estate had holdings in a couple of Grand Cru vineyards. And today, the family holdings are about 40 acres. Since 2015, they are fully certified biodynamic. And what else about it? They make 30 different wines, small quantities. They make 3 Grand Crus. They make about 15 Premier Crus, and the rest are village wines. This is from Fissan. And for all of us who, haven't won the Powerball lately, in terms of affording Burgundy, this is one of those places like Marcenay in the south, but Fissan is the northernmost village in the Côte de Nuit. And this is bargains. Well, if that exists, but these are really great value wines. And the thing is here it's a home run producer making wine from a quote unquote lesser village. In other words, the quality is just going to be really good. Even the Bourgogne Rouge and Blanc from this producer is wonderful. I will tell you what makes this wine probably challenging for all of you is the color, because this is not exactly the color Pinot Noir. And so I wanted to add 2 things that I think were going on here in terms of the winemaking techniques that Magnan is known for, and that is, using whole clusters, but also, an extended cold soak, so a pre-fermentation maceration. So leaving the juice and the skins and everything together for about 4 or 5 days at a lower temperature, like in the mid 50 degrees. And that way you're going to get a lot of color, but no tannin, and you're going to get fruit. And I think that probably explains the color of the wine, which should be more red versus not so much depth of color, I should say. Okay. What do we think? Do we have pictures? We must have photos.
Yeah, we
I
do
think-
have pictures. And Tim, some questions on what do you call this tannin level?
Yeah, for me, this is medium. I tell you what exacerbates it, and it's funny because Madeline and I had this discussion this morning, just this morning, about the relationship between tannin and acidity. This wine has really elevated acidity. It is bone dry, and so you are tempted to think the wine is more tannic than it is, but it's not that tannic. Medium tannin here, maybe a shade more, but that's about it.
Mhm.
I think
Evan-
it's ironic when $60 is a great value. You know, I mean, not that it's
Well,
not
I
a
was
great
gonna- I
value.
was
The wine
gonna say,
over delivers,
okay.
but Burgundy prices these days, I think, just to
And
echo
it's
you were
getting
saying,
worse,
It's
you
getting
know,
worse,
and
and
it's
you have some
getting
small
worse.
harvests coming up too, which is going to make it even worse after that. But
Yeah, I think Tim, you can see in the comments that the color really led a few people astray. Here's a
Yeah.
good question here on elevated acidity. What leads to elevated acidity? And Rebecca here says, I would think that it would be less with whole cluster. What do you think of that comment?
No, whole cluster fermentation does not affect acid at all. No, I mean, timing of harvest, you know, how ripe the grapes are when you pick, that's it. Also, the grape is naturally a high acid grape, which Pinot Noir is fairly, especially in a place that historically has been a cooler climate, but thanks to climate change, it's really variable. But this particular vintage, I mean, it's to me, the acid is fairly elevated. Okay. All right, what else? I'm going to make sure we get everything. I chose Grenache, though it didn't seem right. Yeah, it's not. So I would just say the Grenache usually shows less color and just more fruit and more savory qualities and pepper and more Mediterranean-like things if it's old world. Okay, there's Frederic. And the picture on the right is him assuming the classic winemaker's pose.
With two
And
glasses, yes.
Double-fisted drinking, bless his heart, you know. And he's got some really nice Riedel Burgundy glasses working there. Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
Tim, do you mind if I say one thing about the whole acid
Please do.
tannin thing? Because I do
Yep.
think, you know, that color is very deceiving. You know, the important thing is not to take one look at it and go, well, it can't be Pinot Noir by anybody's measure before you even smell it. And sometimes we conclude early on. But the other thing that's important to me is to really get to know yourself in terms of someone who perceives acidity and tannin. And not just
Yeah.
quantifies, but qualifies them. Because if you really follow Tim's discussion, you know, my mouth is still watering from that wine, but the tannins have like totally smoothed out. So,
Yeah.
you know, note to self.
Someone just
Yeah.
asked for the poll results and I just shared it and it was 39% in Grenache. So I wonder if it was the color or
I think this is a really interesting. I want you to all look at this slide now, and I want you to memorize it because this is the changing face of Burgundy with climate change.
Yeah, that's
And you
true.
are going to be seeing things that you are not used to start to happen. It's like, why does Sancerre not taste like Sancerre anymore? Why is Chablis beginning not to taste like Chablis anymore? And everything has to do with places that have historically had marginal climates having consistently warmer climates. So the face of Pinot Noir and what you know, what your time-honored benchmark is in literally in an inflection point right now. And a wine like this today shows you that.
Yeah, good point, Evan. You know, a few weeks back, I wrote a daily missive, and it was called "The Ice Flow is Drifting." And the point of that was basically, you know, these classics that we teach. The reason we teach them is so students, you have a way to learn a system of what is considered classic wines and grapes. At the same time, climate change is slowly making them irrelevant. Because again, temperatures are rising. Also, people are using different clones, different yeast strains, and the wines are changing. But we have to have something to start with in terms of standards and commonality to discuss. So yeah, the world is changing.
the world
That's
is
what they said
changing.
at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. That's the first thing Galadriel said, and she was
The
right.
world is
Okay.
changing and you just need to keep drinking. So
And tasting. Yes, here we go.
And tasting,
Line number
thank
4.
you.
Something different, just for you. Okay, take a look at the glass, not
Wow.
nearly the depth of color. This is a true medium ruby red and fades out though to, you know, kind of a watery rim and a really light pink. And so not whatever it is in terms of the depth of color and grape variety, try to put that together. And then ask yourself what drives the wine when you smell and taste it, right? You just had something from the old world. So ask yourself, compared to wine number 3, wine number 4, what dominates the wine? Do we have fruit and winemaking, or do we have earth and non-fruit? Okay. And then finally, same question as the previous wine, you know, what does the structure of the wine tell you about the climate where the grapes were grown? Okay. With that, let's get right down to it. And so on the nose, the first thing I smell is, or sense, is alcohol. Okay, note to self. Second, you know, predominantly red fruit, really ripe, almost jammy strawberry, red plum. What else? Really ripe, almost bean cherry. And then there's some dark fruit here, kind of maybe dark plum, really ripe blackberries. And again, these are fresh and ripe and almost to the jammy stage. Okay, and that, notice that links to the alcohol I just picked up. What else? There's some savory qualities to it. I'd also say, just real quick, there's kind of an apricot-y, stone fruity quality to the wine, and it's fresh and ripe again. Floral, if anything, there's something savory like lavender. There's also some black pepper here. What else? There's leafy greens. There is fennel. There's some anise. In terms of earth and mineral, not as much. I also get, by the way, and it just clicked for me, there's some mint here. It's very minty. There's a little dusty quality to it. There's no mineral. There's definitely some oak treatment. There is some sweet spice, some vanilla, some toast. I would say it's a mixed, so it's not all new. It's mostly used, probably 30% new versus used. And then the structure, everybody take a sip for science. Okay, unlike the last wine, where everything got almost uncomfortably sour, it's starting up here a bit, but again, this is like strawberry jam with pepper and mint and savory herbs. Okay, so I would say practically everything follows through. Notice that the wine, not very earthy, is very fruit driven, but savory qualities really are right there with the fruit. What else? The oak, you really get on the finish. There's smoke and spices. And then everybody notice in your salivary glands, what are they doing after the previous wines? Taking a break. So they're working, which means there's somewhere between medium and medium plus. If you say in an inhale, well, I don't even have to say on inhale, I get the heat right here, right? And the mintiness, it's almost like the Vicks Vapor Rub factor. Anyway, and finally, the tannins are medium plus, but they're not really pronounced, and the finish is long and complexity is beyond medium plus. So whether the last wine was a wine that made you pay attention and think, this wine is really as much about pleasure and drinking it and deliciousness as anything. Okay, here are your choices, ladies and gentlemen. You have Gamay, remember what I said about it previously. You had Sangiovese, okay. Classic example would be something like Chianti Classico or Brunello or something like that. Think about structurally how Sangiovese, how it's different or how it is, and finally Grenache blend. Your choices in the old world are France and Italy, and then in the new world, California and Australia. Okay, you got a lot of information to work with and some good choices. So go, fight, win, conquer. See what you can do.
I love, Tim, about the tasting is having 6 glasses in front of you and going back between the wines. You know, this wine really sticks out as thematically, there is something different happening. Oh, yeah. So I hope that folks, you know, it is a lot of glassware to wash, but if you do have 6 glasses at home, even if they're slightly differently shaped, it is nice to be able to compare and contrast as you go along.
Yes. I would also say, you know, just a tip about glassware, if you are not doing the catch and release, if you're not spitting and you're drinking and enjoying the wines, I think it's a really great idea not to wash the glasses today. You should rinse them and set aside till tomorrow when you're absolutely sober and you're drinking coffee, and then you can wash them and polish them.
Excellent. Tim, I love the comments that we're getting on the blood orange, super ripe, pink grapefruit, and also your comment about drinking for science is excellent. I'm going to end the poll right now and share the results.
Okay.
and let's see where people are.
Yes.
So you've got 55% on Grenache, 36% on Sangiovese, and then on region, you're about 65 New World, 35, 36 Old World. So what do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So everybody who went to the old world, I want you to do this for me. Go back to wine 3, go back to the Burgundy, take a sip, hold it in your mouth for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then swallow it. And be aware of how earthy the wine is. And then do the same for wine 4. And ask yourself, are these two things alike? The answer is no. They're really different.
Very
All right.
helpful.
Let's see what we got. So everybody, now we're going to hop on a plane. You know, we're probably going to fly from Paris.
And
we're
do you
probably gonna
want
have to fly somewhere else first because it's a long, long way, no matter where you're flying from. So we're going to cross the mighty Pacific. We're going to cross the Atlantic too, probably if we go west. And man, it's a long trip. But we are going to Australia.
Are you going to explain the Gamay versus Sangiovese after we, sorry, not yet. Sangiovese.
Sure, I can do this. I can do this while, you know, while we're moving here. So Gamay, again, you got, if we want to talk about classic examples, we have Beaujolais Village. And again, we've got carbonic, tutti frutti, stem inclusion. Sangiovese, Chianti Classico, grape tannin in the front of the mouth, probably oak tannin in the back, higher acid, less alcohol, and less Hello Kitty. It is really an acidic, tannic, and serious wine. And this wine, by contrast, is richer, fruitier, not as acidic, and certainly not as tannic, and savory with pepper and lavender and things like that. This is comfort food wine. And here we are. We are in the Barossa Valley in South Australia, and really one of the oldest family-owned wineries in South Australia. This is Yalumba, which was founded in 1849 by Samuel Smith. It is still owned by the family. This is Grenache, Bushvine Grenache. And what's interesting is I had this very wine with pizza last week, my colleagues. And it's such a great value. So we're in the Barossa, and I know for a fact that the oldest Syrah vines, Shiraz vines, are in South Australia, older than anything in the Rhone, and that probably holds true for Grenache as well, because many of these vines were planted by German immigrants in the 1860s to the 1880s. I don't know about this particular bottling, but I'm sure, you know, here you're looking at vines over 50 years old easily. So here we are. This is Yalumba's Bushvine Grenache. That's the winery. I've been there a couple of times over the years. Louisa Rose is the chief winemaker. She's one of my heroes/heroines. I think she's the queen of Viognier. And certainly she makes brilliant dry Riesling, and she's got an amazing team. What's interesting about Yalumba is they have their own cooperage. They're one of the few wineries left in Australia where they make many of their own barrels. Not all of them, but many, especially for the higher end cuvées. And again, everything they do is good. And I think this is one of the better values for Grenache. And that hint of mintiness, by the way, usually takes me to Australia too.
Mm. It's very present. That's amazing. Great. Any other questions on wine number 4? If not, we're moving on to wine number 5. Evan, back to you.
Yeah, no, I just want to say how happy I am to always show Grenache. You know, I've been privy to this group that the next real thing, the next thing is going to be Grenache. It's going to be Grenache, and it so rarely is. But then when you have them, you try and wonder why not. I mean, there's so much about Grenache that is so appealing, from its flavor profile to its texture to manageable tannins for the average people to different interpretations of it all over the world, from the south of France to Australia to what we're doing here down in the south coast of California to what they're doing up in Washington State on the eastern part, and northern Walla Walla part of Oregon that crosses over with Washington, and there's really good examples of it down in the south. I mean, everywhere. So I'm going to remain on my bandwagon for Grenache, and of course Spain too. I didn't even say that, where the grape is actually from. Okay, let us talk a little bit about glass of wine number 5. And again, just a few questions to consider. The red fruit, blue fruit, black fruit thing that we've been kind of dancing around as we've spoken about red wines. Usually one tends to dominate versus the other. So take a sense and get a sense of what that is. In the particular case of this wine, you know, are you getting any impression of raisination or something desiccated? That's something to think about. That'll be more in the mouth and in the nose. And then obviously, do we have any floral elements, which with red wines, I think is very much a telltale sign of red versus purple, oftentimes follows the same harmony that red versus black or blue fruits do as well. So as I look at this wine here, it tends to be a bit more translucent than the wine we just came off of, which had a lot of color. Ditto the wine prior to that. So this wine is probably in the medium plus-ish vein of color. It's starting to turn color as well too. So rather than being sort of that youthful purpley thing, I'm getting more into that kind of garnety stage. The edge quality being sort of more pushing in the salmony or pinkish or more salmony vein of things. That was for Tim, as Li Meng would always like to say. And it doesn't really stain that much. So you've got color here. And when I swirl it around, the viscosity is probably average plus. The tears on my glass are relatively thick, but they're falling relatively quickly, which is interesting at this point. I don't try and make too much of the legs, particularly too early. But let's go into the fruit earth wood. Let's smell this wine. And right off the bat, coming off of the first 2 reds that we just had, this is a very, very different wine in profile, different wine in terms of the nature of the fruit, the quality of the fruit, and of course, the color of the fruit. So right off the bat, to sort of lead the witness there on point 2, everything about this wine has sort of a desiccated, dried character here. So the fruit that's black tends to be more in the fig, pushing that wrinkly, dark mission fig character. It tends to be more prune than plum, although there's some extremely ripe plum characters there. The cherries are sort of pushing more on the dried cherry rather than the fresh cherry thing. All of that. There is, again, a hint of citrus to this wine. This has that same sort of orange peelish thing that Tim talked about before. However, my peel here is probably more, again, ripe but dried as well, too. A little bit of blue fruit, some dark floral elements, blues and lavenders, things like that. But again, more potpourri-ish in nature, a little bit more dried. I get licorice. I get dried sweet pipe tobacco. I get some little 5 spices, some interesting elements that suggest wood to me, picking up a little bit of a leathery character here, which is both grape as well as obviously being more dried and desiccated by definition. And then I'm getting this whole sort of melange of sort of sweetness elements that are kind of like molasses and caramel, but not so much from oak. This is sort of like the combination of, I think, of processing and things like that. And almost in honor of Mardi Gras, which is happening very shortly, praline. There's like a praline element to this wine as well, too. And just a lot of stuff going on. This is clearly a very complex wine. In the palate, the wine has some richness. It's an interesting assortment of flavors. This is not your standard operating procedure Cabernet Sauvignon or whatever. I mean, it's very interesting and very complex. It's not what I would call a super big grape either, right? So there's a lot of grapes here and it has a lot of power to it. And it's not a huge wine from a volume standpoint, from an impact or an attack standpoint. I would put the body here at sort of medium plus, but it's not super hot the way the Shiraz we were just coming off of has. The texture is still very round and creamy and smooth. The acid level here for the amount of weight and everything that it's carrying is probably somewhere in the medium plus, leaning towards medium vein. The finish on it is medium plus. The interest and the intrigue of the wine is very high. There's a lot of complexity going on here, and I'm sort of charmed by the difference in the wine. I think it's really kind of fun and cool.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So what do we got grape-wise here? Well, we're in some interesting lands. We're clearly in the non-Cabernet Sauvignon, non-sort of, for lack of better words, classic French or Franco filed vinifera grapes. You have Tempranillo as a blend, and Tempranillo, as we know, can range from as delicate and easy drinking as what you might find in Rioja to the bigger, powerful wines of Toro or Ribera del Duero, etc. We have Cortavina as a blend. This is the grape that you would find up in Valpolicella as dominant, but throughout the Veneto, not just just in this part of the world. Sangiovese, again, we talked about this before. Think about what Tim talked about with respect to Chianti, but in its bigger form, you could find it in Brunello as well. And then, of course, Brunello Gentile in places like Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, et cetera. And then, of course, you have your other choices. Being sort of in this Iberianish Italo thing, of course, Spain and Italy are choices for you. But once again, I would encourage you that there's a lot of experimentation in Australia with a lot of Mediterranean grapes these days, and they're particularly leaning in hard to the Iberian grapes and the Italian grapes. And then Oregon, particularly not so much the Willamette Valley, but remember, Oregon is more than the Willamette Valley, guys. And if you're down south in places like the Umpqua, or the Hood River, the Southern Valleys, et cetera, they're playing with a lot more grapes that require warmer climates than what you find in the Willamette. You could have California on there, you could have other grapes on there, but this is, I think, an interesting genre of grapes to play with here.
Great. I see a nice comment here from Kevin, nice milk chocolate finish. That's an interesting comment. I love that. I love that. Great. Evan, I think that people are a little confused between the three grapes because you see 38%, 38%, 25%, sort of a third and a third, a third on Tempranillo, Corvina, and Sangiovese. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of confusion about new versus old world, but how would you help somebody trying to decide between those three varieties?
Yeah, well, if you think about Tempranillo right off the bat, Tempranillo is really more, unless you're in a super, super warm place, it's really more about red fruit flavors than it really is about black fruit flavors. You also find that whole palette of things that they refer to as balsamico in the wine, the balsamic flavors, which can range from herbs to incense to masala to all sorts of other things. And while I'm wanting to find a lot, I'm not finding a lot of that in this wine. So that probably to me is not necessarily where I'm going. Sangiovese, you'll pick up a lot more of the red fruit character as well too, even in Brunello, which is probably the most bold of the impressions of Sangiovese. It tends to be still kind of more red fruit. And this one to me is really more about sort of elements of black and desiccated fruit. And usually when you're making Tempranillo and you're making Sangiovese, you're probably not going to go in this direction in terms of your stylistic interpretation of them there. They're more classic table wines. They're not made in this vein. Whereas you look at your friends in Corvina and Rodinella, Molinara, that famous Italian Venetian law firm, you're going to find that there are interpretations which reflect a style like this, and that would not surprise me if we don't move that way.
Folks can't see the poll. I'm just.
I think that if you're having trouble seeing the poll, just take a look at your menu and click around it. It may have been obscure because we're sharing the poll right now. I can launch it again. It's very strange because.
No, I'm not. I just saw the.
Well, no, I just took it
there
down.
You go. There you go.
I just took it down because people weren't. Some people were voting, and some people said that they couldn't see it. So I'm not really sure why. I'm sharing where the results are on this last poll.
There you go. Okay. Well, that reflects very much what we just talked about in terms of thinking about it. And once again, think about what I said. Think about that, and think about, most importantly, particularly with respect to Tempranillo and maybe Sangiovese, think about examples of those wines that you've had and how much or how little they share in common with what is in your glass staring at you right now.
Great.
So on that note, let's hop our plane. We got another set of flights there to get to where we're going to. We took a long flight to get where we are now as we leave Australia, and we're going to head back to that old world part. So we've got to hop probably once again, as Tim would point, a series of flights there. I don't know what airline we're flying, probably a combination thereof or different shares. But we're going to leave Australia and we're going to head back to the old world, and we're going to head back. I don't know why it fell on me this day, but I get both of the wines that come out of Italy. So no, guys, we're not in Spain. And as I referred to earlier, I'm just not getting enough Tempranillo hues out of that wine to do so. And although you could make styles of Tuscan wines out of Sangiovese, that would use this technique. And in fact, there are people these days in Tuscany who are using the technique that we're going to land on momentarily. They're still relatively rare. But this is a very timely classic technique, and it's called ripasso, and we're going to talk about it. And it happens up in the Veneto, and it happens specifically in the appellation of Valpolicella, which is where we are today. And we're going to start at the house of Tomasi. It's important that we start there, number one, because not only are they leading historic producers in this greater Venetian region of Valpolicella, but they were the first people to actually employ the technique of ripasso, and the first people to feel so proud about it that they put it on the label as well. So what does ripasso refer to? So ripasso itself refers to a technique by which you take the, in the case of what you would be doing in the Veneto here, the lees, the leftover skins, all of that that's left over from your Amarone, and then you run your free run juices that you're going to make your Valpolicella on top of it, and you ferment them together. So think about it somewhat like sourdough starter. For those of you who caught the sourdough craze during the pandemic and started baking your hearts out, you knew how important it was to keep your starter alive to maintain flavor profile, continuity, and an element of sort of a richness that would carry through. Well, when you do this with wine, in this case, you're going to pick up, as you've had Amarone before, on that sort of desiccated, sweeter, prunier, denser, somebody said chocolate, chocolatey character that you're going to find in Amarone, and you're going to find it in this wine. So think about Ripasso Valpolicella as sort of like Valpolicella on steroids, right? Halfway, if you will, to Amarone without being Amarone itself. So it's got a higher ABV than a typical Valpolicella would, because your level of sweetness that's maintained in the Amarone lees continues to ferment out dry. You've got more alcohol by volume. You've got more of a perceived sweetness to it, and but it's not as rich as Amarone. So I hope that that sort of analogy makes sense to everybody. You're kind of halfway there, not living on a prayer, but making it there. This process, by the way, takes somewhere between 15 to 20 days of keeping the wine on these used skins before to make it. And by the way, Classico, and this is a Valpolicella Classico, very much like Chianti Classico, Verdicchio, all the Classico simply means the heart of the region. It doesn't mean classic styled or better or anything like that. So anytime you do see Classico on an Italian wine label, it simply means the central part of that. And like I said, this is another area that goes back a long period of time. I don't know where the grapes, Corvina and stuff, have roots in Greco-Roman times, but this is an area that's very, very old and developed. And this again is a very classic example of ripasso Valpolicella. As I mentioned before, Pierangelo, hola, right? Or ciao, I should say, right? Is a thing you are starting to see in other parts of Italy, most notably Tuscany. So I will throw a big bone out to those of you who did think it was Sangiovese, because if you've ever had one that was done in a ripasso technique, it could share something in common with this, although the flavor profiles obviously of Sangiovese and Corvina blended wines are a little bit different.
So we got two questions, Evan. One question from Scott. If there was one trait to point to ripasso, would it be a sensation of sweetness with a thicker texture? That is something that he's getting on the very tip of his tongue.
Yeah, and that is, again, that's part of that Amarone thing. So, if you've had Amarones before, you are going to get that sort of richer, sweeter. Obviously, the sweet style, the Recioto della Valpolicella, is actually sweet. Classic Amarone made in that style is dry, but because it is so ripe, you do get a sensation, if you will, of sweetness. And once again, the sort of raisination character is going to, it's not as full on, again, as Amarone, but it's definitely more than your classic Valpolicella. So if you find yourself in that middle ground, you're probably in ripasso.
Great. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, there is a little sleeve sticker at the back of the bottle that you can peel off and see the alcohol percentage. So if your mine's downstairs, so the team that's tasting downstairs, but thank you for showing it off. It's hidden. It's just hiding the details of what the producers are. We are rebottling from producers, brands around the world. This is not wine that we're just buying off bulk to put into our bottles. These are producers that have signed off for us to be able to use it in this fashion. Evan, there's another question here from Akeem, and welcome back, Akeem. I got dry rose petals and rose hip tea. Is that not deep enough? Did you get any of that rose?
Yeah. I mean, you get sort of a dried floral character. When wines get like this, it becomes harder for me to delineate the specific genre of flowers, but it sort of sits a little bit in that kind of potpourri-ish thing. It might be a potpourri, which is dominated more by darker flowers rather than a lighter flower scent. I mean, potpourris come in different shapes and sizes depending on which ones you want to throw in your drawer and in your closet and all that other stuff. But I could definitely see that. I don't think the florality is as much. I mean, I think it's there. I don't think it's as dominant to me as it is in some of the other wines here. It's really more about the desiccation and then about some of that sweetness elements. Like I said before, that sort of molasses mocha being chocolate and coffee, right? Kind of thing that you get here, which is classic of Amarone too.
Excellent. All right, Maddie. You got to unmute.
I'm muted. Yes, here I go. And I have one parting shot about Grenache in Australia, because I love this. One winemaker just said with sort of admiration and disgust that if there were some sort of cataclysmic event, the two things that would make it would be cockroaches and old vine Barossa Grenache. I thought that was really cool because you look at them and they really are looking at you, flipping the finger, right? And don't mess with me. I'm still kicking out plenty of fruit and I'm 100 years old, right? Anyway, I just had to share that. Okie dokie. We are moving on to wine number 6 and reminding myself of what I put up here. Not unlike Evan's questions. The whole issue of characterizing the fruit as fresh, ripe, just ripe, overripe, underripe, jammy, dry. You can even add confected in there. And the whole issue of cool climate, moderate or warm climate is going to lead us to consider acidity and alcohol levels in particular. And again, I can't stress enough, you got to really be honest with yourself and get a sense of how you perceive structural elements, because you may forgive a boatload of tannin, but overly sensitive to acidity. Hold that thought. And then finally, qualifying the tannins, because it isn't just medium plus, high. It's an issue of what they feel like. Are they copious but smooth? Are they edgy and mean? You can get creative with this. Okay, this is where Li Meng's emphasis on the color really gets entertaining, because this is as opaque gets. And if you just move the glass, don't even swirl it. It isn't staining the glass, it's painting the glass. And it is utterly saturated to the very rim, and I'm searching for a color and it looks like violet or purple. So this is telegraphing very simply a thick-skinned grape or grapes, a wine that is quite young. And when I move it in the glass, it is, trudging around the glass. So it's telegraphing a lot of extract and probably a significant chunk of alcohol as well. Okay. Aromatically, the only word I can think of is whammo, because I'm often sitting here going, gee, Tim and Evan are so descriptive on the nose, and I usually have to go to the palate to get all those adjectives, but I don't even think I have to put this on the palate. It is singing a loud song. It is exotic and intense. And before I get precious in the description, I'm getting upfront quite a bit of wood, and I'm going to describe it as sweet baking spices and vanilla, but chocolate as well. And then mixed with it, not underneath it, is this super ripe and probably a combination of jammy confected fruit that is largely, to my palate, blue and black, and then a boatload of spice, which I can define easily as a combination of pepper, black, white, and green, and also sweet spices, Chinese five spice, that type of thing. And then floral, big time. It's got both fresh and dried flowers. And again, sweet, and it smells like I'm coming through a garden, and I've got a handful of potpourri and picking fresh flowers. It is. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate, and then we'll keep going.
We've got a great comment here that I absolutely love. There's a lot of deli meat comment.
That's a great comment. You're talking to the vegan vegetarian, so you know sometimes I have to channel somebody else's experience. But yeah, deli meat, or what one of my friends calls the Jimmy Dean
Oh yeah,
fragrance and flavor. And now that you say it, it's big time on the palate. You know, meaty. And I'm going to define the fruits because I didn't do it before. It is you know, to me, black currant, plum, some prune in there. Remember, jammy, super ripe baked, blueberries, you know, like cooked blueberry jam. Hello. We talked about the florals. There's definitely a veggie and herbal element to this, like cooked beets, kola nut, sweetness there, and earthiness. And you know, I hesitate to use the word because it makes us travel, but, you know, a garigi kind of dried herbal character brush. You think of those old cowboy movies. And in terms of texture, there's a bitterness to it. I haven't really defined, which Tim and I discussed earlier today, and is a flavor as opposed to astringency. This has significant tannin. Like, you know, if I were to define it, a medium plus to high, but frankly, there's so much illusion of sweet. You think it's high, Tim? I think there's so much, you know, quote unquote sweetness on top of the tannin, or my palate is just, you know, reeling from the impact of the wine as a whole, that I'm not perceiving it, or I'm not really defining it as high. So Tim says high, I'll rock on with that, but you can taste the wine through it. All that, you know, there might be some actual sweetness to this wine, but I think a lot of it is an illusion from the ripeness and the alcohol. And I think there's a rustic quality to this wine that is intriguing. Now, the one thing that I haven't mentioned is earth. And I'm not picking earth up, and I am going to be curious to see if my colleagues do. I get it maybe in like fresh dirt, like you're in the garden just shoveling a little bit, and then the dried herbal element. Another PS to this, and I'm not dogging the wine, I'm just noticing the finish is not particularly long. It is, to me, sufficient. You know, it falls off slightly. So at the end of the day, we have a very ripe, full-bodied, wildly fruit-forward red wine that has plenty of oak and alcohol. It's delicious. It is tannic. And I'm intrigued to see what our options are in the poll.
All right, here we go. I'm going to launch this. You should see the poll up, and you should see the questions on screen as well, since we're recording this. So Maddie?
Bravo for whoever said needy to Ching, you know.
And she's a vegan too. I love that comment.
You know, there we go. I think the last time I had a piece of like salami was 30 years ago, but I do take little bites of lamb on occasion.
There you go.
Or, you know, high quality cured stuff. So Malbec, Petit Syrah, Tempranillo blend. And I'm just going to do the varietals first. Malbec can certainly look like this. I mean, it can be opaque. It tends to have a pretty floral character to it, especially if I'm considering Argentine Malbec, high altitude Argentine Malbec. The tannins to me are a little bit are moderate. They can be, you know, moderate plus, but they tend to be quite smooth. And I get Bordelaise tags, which I have to admit I'm not getting significantly in this wine, and I haven't described them. You know, I haven't gone strictly black and red currant tobacco and such. Petit Syrah, certainly at its loudest, can be as powerful as this wine. And what else to say about it? It's often in, you know, field blends. So we don't see monovarietal Petit Syrah that often. And it's a little sad because I think it's got plenty of natural, I don't know if I'd say class, but certainly character to carry itself. And I think that modern bottlings deserve attention. And Tempranillo blend, again, if we're talking, for the most part, Spain, we're going to be talking about, in my mind, a little bit more dried rather than cooked fruit, and dominantly red, but certainly some black fruits as well, and a lot of oak. By the way, I didn't define the oak on this, and I didn't find a tech sheet for it, but there's a little bit of that coconut cream pie sweetness to it, so that I would imagine it's a combo, or it's got a significant chunk of American oak. So that could speak to Rioja as well. And then Old World Spain, there we go for the Tempranillo.
I'm going to share the results.
Here we go. That's right. Am I running late? I did such a good job on the first one, and
You
made
did
it go
great.
long.
You did great. You did great.
We've got almost 30% for Malbec. I can understand that. Half of the folks are going for Petite Syrah, and we've got a respectable nod to Tempranillo. And then 7% other. Please speak up what you think that is. So what is that?
They had Mourvèdre and Syrah.
Excellent. So are we like at 90%? How's my math doing here? 80, 95. We're almost at 100% of people who are voting, or am I wrong?
No, not quite. I think
I'm sorry.
people,
Well,
yeah,
so much
that's
I
okay.
need to, you know.
We'll keep moving along.
I think
that
Mourvèdre and Syrah are interesting, especially Mourvèdre because of the rusticity. The meatiness, I think, would come from the Syrah. Cool. Are we ready to reveal?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I think where are we in Italy? Well, we're getting on the plane, but we are going back to the New World. We are going to California. We are going to an area that is east of San Francisco Bay. It is the Sacramento River Delta. We're going to an AVA called Clarksburg, which is really neat. It's adjacent to Lodi. It benefits big time, both from breezes coming in from the Pacific and winds coming down from the Sierra foothills to the northeast. This is produced by a winery that does not have any estate grapes, but it makes it a mission, Venom Cellars, to buy from top farmers throughout California. So if you look at the laundry list of the appellations they source from, there's Clarksburg, and then Lodi adjacent to it. But they're getting grapes from Monterey, from Sonoma Coast and such, Napa Valley for sure. This is Petite Syrah. It is, there's a reason, there's a doggy on that, hold that thought. It is a single vineyard that's been farmed for this wine for, I think, over 15 years. So it's a single vineyard, Clarksburg Petite Syrah. This is a very attractive older house that must belong to the grower, the Wilsons. And this is an area that does a great job, by the way, for a Chenin Blanc as well. And Venom does make some Chenin too, I believe. And one of the two partners worked at Pine Ridge, so maybe that inspired them to jump into that. We've got Richard Bruno and Chris Kondos. Chris comes from a Greek background, grandfather made wine. And oh yes, I wanted to tell you about the label, Pets, because that is what the Ken Wilson, the grower, calls Petite Syrah, and they liked it. And since they owed Wilson a debt of gratitude, he was one of the first growers to take a chance on them. They dedicated this wine to his dog, Tanker. So that's a picture of his dog. They think that this wine has a potential to be your best friend. A couple things about Clarksburg. I talked about the cooling influence, which hits this area not in the morning, but in the afternoon, which separates itself from some other areas that get influence from the Pacific. I think this is a really cool example of Petite Syrah. I think, I would have to have it as a digestif. I don't know what I would pair with it, and I would sip it. But I think it is beautifully balanced and a good ambassador for modern versions of this grape variety.